it's also helpful for us to have a really good understanding of the mind and how it works. And so often when I start this human operating system presentation, I will do a little review of the things that I've gone through, because oftentimes it's been a couple of weeks since I've seen the patient. And the last time we got together, we discussed the brain as a hollow ball on a stick, and that the perspective of the self is as if we're inside, looking around at different ideas rippling across the surface. And we've got more than one source of light. We've got rage or anger, we've got pride, we've got joy, and we've got fear. And whenever these sources of activation tickle the cortex, ripple, spread out, and these develop into our trains of thought, which are like little movies that we see. They rise up from the background, they fade into the back. So these humps, these little bumps there, represent these different trains of thought. And we're kind of like television signal in that we've got more than one movie going on at the same time. The only ones that we're aware of are the ones that we turn our attention towards. So the preconscious mind is all of this stuff. The unconscious is the stuff that we don't like to look at. So as these spindles of activity are rising and falling, and you can see that in these brain waves, what we realize then is that from the inside perspective of the person, these different desires are varying in intensity. The perspective of the person, which is from that window of sensation and perception to the outside world, and then all those trains of thought. Sometimes we're thinking about something, sometimes we're acting out of habit. Balance between thinking about things and acting out of habit, these are both, they have about the same intensity. And then when we're overwhelmed by panic, rage, or euphoria, the frontal lobes get shut down and we get drawn into that train of thought. And so again, these different trains of thought are sponsored and assisted by different structures in the brainstem. The amygdala brings us fear and anger, and the frontal lobes give us a sense of direction and purpose, and the reward activation system gives us that glow of joy. These things can operate in different degrees of intensity as they compete for our attention. Different neurotransmitters help to influence the degree to which these are active. Substance abuse influences the degree of activation of these different trains of thought. In the euphoric state, we have a lot of joy, common sense goes offline, pretty soon we adapt to the substance, we feel normal, and then in a state of withdrawal, we have the dysphoria and mental fogging. Alcohol, the withdrawal is characterized by excess glutamate with anxiety. Opiates, they suppress the effects of adrenaline, so then in withdrawal, we have not only the dynorphin-mediated low dopamine and dysphoria, we also have the adrenaline-driven anxiety and irritability, which is why people lose it, and the similar states. The human operating system, which is the mechanism and origin of consciousness, desire, and emotion. So it's very helpful when we talk about things that we can't pour into a jar or put in a box to think about things as processes rather than as objects that you can stack and arrange and whatnot. And so a process is a series of events, one after another, and everything in the universe is composed of process, events that happen one after another. For example, in an emotion, first something happens, then we have a train of thought to evaluate the situation. Something happens, we evaluate the situation, then we have a feeling. For example, 1/8 of a tank of gas. You're out in South Dakota, it's dark, you have no money, no cell phone, no blanket, no jacket, you're not even sure where you are in South Dakota. How do you feel? It's starting to snow. All right, so 1/8 of a tank of gas, you're coming up on your favorite gas station, plenty of time, plenty of money, how do you feel? So it's not the event, it's not the 1/8 of a tank of gas, it's your evaluation of the situation that sets up that internal tension and results in a feeling. And in an attitude, we get so used to thinking about something a particular way, we jump from what happened to how we feel, and we still go through that train of thought, but we're no longer consciously aware of it. So in therapy, a lot of what we want to do is we want to learn how to slow down those trains of thought and elicit the beliefs and assumptions that we've gotten into the habit of using so that we can think in a more effective fashion. The trains of thought have a life cycle. Sensations result in perceptions, and if everything is as expected, we keep right on acting out of habit. Some sensations become more intense and lead to desires, which elicit ideas. And if we think about it, well, we might decide to not act. We might decide to act, and if everything is as expected, we keep acting out of habit. Or we might decide to wait. And if we decide to wait, we develop an internal tension, a state of anticipation, and that can influence our perceptions, activate desires and thoughts.
What else do you know is red, yellow, and green? Traffic light. It's the exact same thing.
Yep, go.
You know, and so when you oversimplify, they usually get it. And then you can break it down into those component parts so they can evaluate.
To make this easier, is I promised them a little story to illustrate how these things work. The perspective of the self is here we are in our head looking out through this window of sensation and perception. Then we have these channels of different desires, and each channel then, all of the trains of thought are going through this life cycle. The types of desires that attract our attention is the desire to be safe, our pride and sense of what's ours, our determination and will, and joy. And this is lemonade, by the way. I haven't changed that yet. So different systems look at these things in different ways. For example, you've seen the cartoons with the angel on one shoulder, the devil on the other, and the guy in the middle. Okay. Well, that angel on one shoulder is your internalized parent, your superego, your desire to be safe. And of course, when you get scared, your butt cheeks clench up, and that's why the root chakra is down there. And the guy in the middle, the internal adult, that's your ego, your intellect, your reason, and sense of direction. And the devil, lately he's been promoted to inner child, and we've got the fun aspect and the angry aspect. And we'll talk about all this later. So let's start with the idea of consciousness. The brain is a hollow ball on a stick. Up at the top of the brain stem, we have the reticular activating system, actually runs all the way through, and it will send signals out to that hollow ball of the cortex, and whatever's out there will bounce back and we'll detect it like a little blip. And we call this consciousness. So imagine that here we all are sitting on the brainstem. We're the committee of the self. The walls of this room are the cortex. And so I can take and shine my attention around, and I can look at that big screen TV hooked up to the eyeballs. I can listen to the ears, tune into the ears, remember something, think about something. I can shine my attention around inside of the cortex. What's actually happening is it's happening one flash at a time. Each slice then brings back a little bit of awareness. And we call that consciousness. So one slice after another, it makes that little movie of us being awake and aware. And whatever we turn our attention towards is what we become aware of. We call it consciousness because to con is to steer. For example, the conning tower, that's where the con is, where the boat is steered. We've often sliced vegetables, and it makes that shush sound, which means to slice. Consciousness literally translates to steer our slice. And one slice after another, it makes that movie that we experience as being alive and awake. Everybody with me?
I like using the steer your slice to describe consciousness, because I was using this probably about 7 or 8 years ago with a client, and I got to steering your slice, the whole idea that the cortex just kind of flashes on certain things, and this gal said that makes sense, and that's just stupid enough that I can remember it. Steering your slice.
It might seem really ridiculous, but that is in fact where the words come from.
Yeah. I'll never forget that.
This is the brain upside down, and to illustrate how this works, imagine that there's an eyeball right here, and the lens in the eyeball flips the image upside down. The nerves carry the signal to the back of the brain here. So that big screen TV that we're looking at when we see something is upside down in the back of the brain, and from that perspective, the auditory information is coming from up and on the sides. That's the perspective of the self. All this flashing back and forth between the brainstem and the cortex is what makes our brain waves. Whatever we tune our attention towards makes that series of experiences that we have when we are awake. So these, as sensations spread out across the cortex, they evoke things from the background pattern of activity, which enables us to remember things, to recognize them and remember them. For example, if I take two middle C tuning forks and I ring one and I hold it up next to the other one, the first one will resonate in response to that middle C note. And it's a similar process in our neural circuitry, that when the neural circuitry has acclimatized to something in the past, then when something similar comes along, it's likely to evoke that pattern out of the background and enable us to recognize something. For example, if you're out fishing and the fishing pole starts to twitch, it makes you think things like, ooh, ooh, it's the big fish. And then you realize, yeah, thank you for playing. Join us next week. We'll have fresh new shoes for you. So most of these sensations fade into the background and become memories, but once in a while something special happens, and it becomes a special type of memory, an ideal. And so a lot of our imprinting experiences lead to these ideals. Some of our customers have had some imprinting experiences using various substances. You might have ripples spreading out from a sensation. The first one might be of a dark cylindrical object, and then you recognize it as a pen. You discriminate and see, oh, it's a blue pen. And this process of perception actually outpaces events and enables us to see what's likely to happen in the future, and hence my ability to catch a pen, for example. So the persistence of these ripples across the cortex results in these trains of thought. We can perceive what's likely to happen in the future. We can reconstruct what happened in the past. We can flash our attention back and forth on these sequences of events, and this is what gives us the perception of time. Some people can upset themselves enormously by living way up here in the future or living way back here in the past, which is why to be here now is like Wisdom 101. And it's a good way to calm yourself down, is to bring yourself into the present moment. Trains of thought rise up from the background, they fade into the background, and they become memories. But not all of our sensations fade away. Some sensations become more intense, lead to longer trains of thought, and that can result in desire formation. Here's our hero, Amoeba Man. He goes for the good stuff, runs away from the bad stuff, and he's got everything he needs to have emotions. His brain anticipates things, his muscles get tense and ready to act, and his stomach and glands provide the sensations to power desires. Here he is with a sensation that's becoming more intense. This leads to those ideals. So here he is in the desert. He's got a bench in front of him, muddy water, a few bugs in it, lukewarm, bulging carton of milk, ice cold lemonade. Which one is going to be the ideal? Most of us would pick the lemonade, ice cold. So the ideal attached to that sensation forms a desire. And a lot of our clients forget to go back and look at the sensation that they're having and to separate it from the ideal that they've gotten in the habit of using. And this creates some confusion. If somebody can't tell the difference between withdrawal, hunger, fear, then what's going to happen? They're either going to be very addicted to something or quite large. So it's very helpful to get people to look at the actual sensations and then to choose the ideal that fits that, rather than to just assume that this is what they want, this is what they've got to have. Just like our sensations resulted in a series of thoughts that gave us perception, our desires lead to a series of ideas about how to accomplish it. Walk the mountain, climb the mountain, get the lemonade. So the way this works is the sensation plus the ideal forms a desire, and then memories and beliefs are assembled into these movies about how to accomplish what we want. And the thing is, we have more than one movie under construction at the same time, just like we saw in the brainwaves. We saw all of those different movies rising and falling at the same time. And usually, the most intense one catches our attention, and then when we're not busy, we might tune into that desire, and in this case, it's the Lemonade Channel. He's hamming it up. He's sprouted a sword, shield, campaign background music because he knows that the other desires are going to remind him that the dragon lives up there. And if he persists, they might even come up with their own movie. Something like, yeah, go on up there with your stupid hat. See what happens. So sometimes we decide to not act. We think about something and we decide to not act. So what's happened? We had the train of thought. We had the sensation of thirst. We had the ideal of lemonade. We came up with a little movie of going to get it off the mountain. We decided, nope, not going to do that because the dragon's up there. But if we're still thirsty and we still want the lemonade, we're just going to come up with a new idea, a new way to do that. And so we experience this as temptation, rationalization, rumination. And this process continues until we get a new ideal or until the sensation fades away. So with a lot of our customers, they assume that if you're getting a craving and you're going into withdrawal, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse until you cave in and use. It's difficult for them to recognize that if they don't use, the sensation of withdrawal will fade away and they will feel better. It's also difficult sometimes for them to accept a different ideal. For example, if we go for the water, then this whole lemonade business fades away. Here's the restructured plan. Typical temptation. No one will ever know. And of course, there's a little sneaky tiptoe music. And he decides, yeah, I'm good at I can do that. No one will ever know. So he decides to go for it. Well, he's pretty good at walking. He doesn't have to think left foot, left foot. He can put it on autopilot. He can act out of habit. And so in this case, the basal ganglia do their thing. Left foot, left foot. And that frees his attention to think about other things like, what if the dragon wakes up? So there he is, bebopping to the mountain, and he sees the dragon, snaps out of his daydreams. The dragon wakes up. So he hides, and he starts thinking, uh-oh, what went wrong? Did he smell me? What should I do? And of course the gland band plays that looming doom on the way to the principal's office music, and our ever-supportive internal chorus of other desires start singing our doom song. And he can't decide what to do. Run or hide, run or hide. He's in a state of anticipation. He's decided to wait. He's got the internal tension that influences his sensations and perceptions, activates different desires and ideas. And so an emotion is a state of anticipation with internal tension that can influence our perceptions and activate trains of thought. And the human operating system, we have several different desires. Each train of thought has the not act, thinking about it loop, the anticipation and internal tension wait loop, and the acting out of habit or react loop. Our stream of consciousness results from switching between channels of various desires, sensations, and perception. So this is the whole thing put together, the life cycle of the different trains of thought. Acting out of habit, anticipation and internal tension and emotion, and just thinking about things. And to put things in perspective, there's the window to the outside world, and each of these desires, the trains of thought are going through this life cycle. And there's the different types of desires. And here's our young man and his personal reality simulator. The window of the world of sensation and perception, the cone of his attention, and you can see that he's tuned us out. This waking consciousness is not our only type of consciousness. Every night we go to sleep, and that window to the outside world closes down to a little point, and our inner world becomes more intense. And as we go to sleep, we file away the day's events in the context of the rest of our life, and then we start to dream. And as we dream, we get our priorities in order, in balance, and then when we're ready, the window of the outside world pops open and we wake up, ready for the new day. A delirious person can't necessarily tell which one of these is real. Grandpa, with his pneumonia, for example, he might talk to some people that aren't there. He might talk to us for a while, and he'll talk to a different crowd of people, and then the first crowd of people, and then us again. It's channel surfing. Somebody that's really emotionally volatile, they might be with us and on the same page and then get sucked into their fear or sucked into their shame and pride or sucked into their anger. Very handy to be able to file things away effectively, and one of the things that helps us do that is anandamide, which we'll talk about in a little while. And if something really bad happens, somebody might have one of those near-death experiences where they experience leaving their body, a life review, coming to some kind of conclusion, and then a journey back to the body. And many of our spiritual traditions and religious traditions are based on these near-death experiences, which is kind of handy since this is how the mind maintains itself. So the first step is to quit trying to solve all the problems and just let it go, settle down and relax. And this is the heart of mindfulness, is to quit trying to decide and just let all that stuff float by. If you lay there in the bed and you're just thinking about all your problems and what you're going to do tomorrow, well, then you're going to have a hard time going to sleep. If you just let the little movies in your head play, they'll settle down and you can go to sleep. This is the art of becoming grounded. And this is like step one of mindfulness. When we go to sleep, anandamide helps to break the short-term memory loops and helps us to file things away in an emotional context. Having things in balance is good, and in a lot of cases, the material that we filed away forms a background from which we can process our different desires, and in a lot of cases, our dreams reflect a symbolic journey back to center. You hear people describe these things using traditional language. What does it mean to get yourself together? You could use a modern term like equanimity, or you can use something to pull it together, to do poetry, poesis, to pile it up, to get yourself together. Union is the origin of the word yoga, to yoke things together, to tie them together. Art is to join things together. These different desires are kind of like cats. They wander off in different directions, and people get very ambivalent about things. No plan, nobody's in charge, and then they get their stuff together and they ligate everything together, they tie it together, and then the desires wander off again, and then we religate it, get it back together. And this may be the origin of the word religion, is how do you sort out your priorities and get your different desires together. It's very helpful to look at this as a map and for people to recognize that their little moment of awareness is just some spot on this map, and it's going to wander around. And how do they balance this, and how do they plug into a larger map that might include other people, their friends and family, and things that are important that they value.
Yes, and this takes these concepts, instead of a pinpoint or connecting a few, it starts giving, for our clients, giving that three-dimensional perspective of their life.
Can you talk about the clients that have the drinking dreams or the using dreams?
Sure.
And how that fits into that?
Yeah. In some cases, those are anxiety dreams, and that reflects the conflict that's going on. One of the ways that I became aware of this was I had a series of dreams about car crashes, and the car would slowly roll over, and in some of these dreams, one of my friends might get hurt, and my vehicle would be damaged, and I finally one day I woke up and I said, well, why am I having these dreams? And conscience chirped up with, because you're driving like an asshole. And I realized, yeah, I'm trying to show off to my friends what a good driver I am, how skillful I am, and I'm scaring everybody to death. And so I said, okay, good, conscience. Tell you what, I would like to have a better relationship. I would like to get along with you and listen so that you don't have to send me these dreams. I'll listen to you and pay attention, and that way we can be friends instead of having all these nightmares. And you know what? It worked immediately. It worked immediately. One, I realized that nobody was impressed with my driving skills, including me, and that I did, in fact, have a desire to be safe, and that it was important. And if I didn't listen to it, it was going to get more and more intense, because it was really trying to tell me, don't run off a cliff, don't run off a cliff. So when our clients have using dreams, very often it's like a monster that they're trying to run away from. And it's like something that is trying to seduce them back into a particular way of thinking that they're afraid of. Your conscience will dress up in monster clothes to try to get your attention. Corin here had a great dream. Sasquatch or something like that was coming to get him in this dream. And he says, wait a minute, stop everything. And of course, Sasquatch freezes and he realizes, wait, this is just a suit. And he goes around and he realizes, oh, here's the zipper, and yep, you're full of dust, full of sawdust. That's
Good
how
dream.
these things operate in this other world, in this symbolic world of the deeper self.
And if you think about it, when you know when a client comes in and report a using dream, what is the first thing we assess? You know, what was your response to the
Right,
dream?
what was the emotion?
Yeah, it was like, oh, it really scared me. I was so happy to find out I didn't use. Whew, as a therapist, you go, great.
So when people speak about these things in poetic or traditional ways, I like the idea of connecting this to our more modern terminology. The word spirit comes from breath. If I inspire, I breathe in, expire, I breathe out. So spiros, spirit, is breath. Of course, if the boss tells us, oh, we've got great team process, and we can use process and spirit interchangeably, but if he chooses to use the word process, and he says, we've got great team process, everybody goes, yeah. But if he says, we've got team spirit, everybody goes, yeah, yeah, we got team spirit. If he says, we've got invisible bags of ectoplasm having ray gun wars in the background that you can't see, and we say, yeah, boss, here's your tinfoil hat, yeah, oh, this is great. The cartoons and the special effects in movie have distorted some of our language about spirit and about religion. For example, if you take the word soul is related to Sawohl, S-A-W-O-H-L, which means sea. And we get the word sailing, like sailing a boat, saline, like salty water, from the sea. So if you look at then the cortex and the brainstem as rippling with all of these memories and yearnings and traditions, that's our soul. This type of translation enables us to strongly connect these more traditional ways of describing the self and our inner process with our modern understanding. We have different desires competing for our attention. Different cultures have different ways of representing these. These are hierarchical models where the conscience is in charge and on top. And traditionally, yes, obey your conscience, bow down to your conscience. And certainly I learned, for example, with those series of dreams about car crashes, that yes, you better pay attention to your conscience. And a couple of 100 years ago, we entered the age of reason, where it must make sense. And then after a couple of world wars and failed utopian ideals, we realized that no one desire is in charge. And we can think of a composite of security and comfort as the feminine, composite of power and will as the masculine, and the little spot in the middle is the divine child, the Christ or Krishna consciousness. So in the yoga system, they teach people to deal with fear, then with lust, then with anger, then with pride, until they gradually get it all the way into balance. And there's different systems, and some people, unfortunately, with their efforts to improve, will wall off a particular desire and push it away. Well, gee, these different desires, as we get along with them, they develop in a more positive way. This is the raw animalistic desire. Then, if we work with it, it becomes a romantic aesthetic. It learns to reason with us. And finally, here in the middle, it becomes our wise, kind friend. And so we can see these different elements in our dreams, for example, go through this progression from external monster to wise, kind friend. As we go through life, we build up our map of the world and how it works. our family, our school, our friends. And sometimes we don't get what we want. And sometimes one of our desires doesn't get to be part of the self. It doesn't get to go downtown. Lots of examples of apparently very successful people that are just miserable because part of them doesn't get to be part of the self. And it's okay to be a little off balance as long as all of our desires get to be part of the self. Now, sometimes we might have an ideal, we might see one of those movies and we think, oh yeah, that's how it should be. And then we look at our life and we realize, oh, no, and then how it should be, and then, oh, and we can get ourselves all upset. And it turns out that our desires are like salesmen, and they use sales talk. They use words like should, have to, must, terrible, and cuss words. And the whole motivation there is to get us all fired up like with a great sense of urgency, like we have no choice but to get upset. All of these experiences that accumulate form a map, our map of the world. Well, if we've got a map of a city and it works pretty well, we can get to where we want to go. And if we don't realize that part of that map is upside down, whenever we go into that neighborhood, we're going to become frustrated. So when we change our perspective, when we open ourselves to new information, we get those pearls of wisdom. But if we insist, no, it has to be like that movie, like this, then we become one of those people with issues that whenever a certain subject or idea comes up, we find ourselves getting upset about it. Knowing how to grow is to learn how to change our perspective, to realize that this reality in our head is actually just a map. Flexible people erase that part of the map that isn't working to make room for new information. If you look at our emotions, they are a state of anticipation, and you can see that our beliefs and assumptions form that sense of anticipation. And a lot of times we use these beliefs and assumptions without even thinking about it. So we've developed a process to slow down those trains of thought so that we can become aware of a lot of that self-talk that may or may not be effective. And so the traditional way of doing this before the thought record was the rational self-analysis worksheet developed by Dr. Maltzby when he was here at the University of Wisconsin. And you're familiar with the ABC, the event, evaluation, and the feeling. Guy goes out to go to work and his car wouldn't start, and so he goes through that typical line of stuff, and then I have them imagine themselves with a shiny car in one hand, piece of crap in the other, give them both a good squeeze to try to give them that good visceral sense of, no, calling something a piece of shit doesn't really help you. It just gets stuff on your hand. That when we say something is terrible, it creates this sense of destruction and desolation, and that just really is often out of proportion to the actual significance. And then when we say words like, now I'll never get to work, our unconscious mind brings up this image of an invisible barrier manned by evil fairies that are breaking all our stuff and sabotaging us and helping other people get to work because they hate me. And what we really mean is, oh, this, I might be late. And
This is inconvenient.
so the thing is that we've gotten into the habit of thinking in these ineffective ways. And we're in the habit of driving down the right side of the road. And here we're going to do things differently. We're going to show up in England in this new country, and we're going to drive on the other side of the road. And it's going to be very difficult. So what I try to get people to do is to read this right-hand column a few times so that when this old style of thinking pops up in their head, they're more likely to remember the new way of thinking. So yeah, I tell people that if they imagine themselves on the way to England driving on the other side of the road, then it'll be a lot easier when they get there. And that then they'll gradually get out of London, they'll be driving down the highway, we'll get to chit-chatting, they won't be thinking about it, some car will pop over the hill, and without thinking about it, they'll swerve the wrong way, almost get us killed, And then they'll remember, oh yeah, this is how you do it. And so I try to get people to recognize the value of catching themselves in the act over and over again and getting into the habit of thinking in more effective ways and getting out of the habit of using catastrophic and concrete language, which I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. Now try to take it to the next step, which is that these statements often represent these different desires, that these different desires are often the author of a lot of this self-talk, and that these desires have a good side and a bad side. On the one hand, security keeps us safe and solid. On the other hand, it gives us dread and paranoia. On the one hand, we have purpose, sense of direction. On the other hand, we have pride and shame. On the one hand, we have determination, drive. On the other hand, we have frustration and rage. On the one hand, we have joy. On the other hand, we have being addicted and jaded. And unfortunately, not everybody gets along with themselves. And some people think that growth means to push away one of your desires and just not think about that anymore. But the problem is, this is an example of a humble person that lets other people decide what we're going to do, what we're going to believe. But this excluded energy doesn't just dry up and go away, it becomes intrusive and creates those obsessive and compulsive episodes. For example, when I was walling off my fear, what happens? It starts breaking through, push away fear, then they become more vulnerable to attacks of anxiety. And if they push away the will, they become more susceptible to attacks of rage. And if they push away joy, we're on a budget, we're on a diet, then they're more susceptible to caving in and bringing out the credit cards and eating everything in the refrigerator. So this idea of balance is very helpful. And I try to teach people that the way to undermine these things, these furies inside, is to make the energy that's underneath them part of the self. So if we look then at this as the edge of the self, that raw animalistic desire energy, if we teach the person to work with it, it'll show up often in their dreams and become their wise, kind friend. If we push it away, it'll go through the same process of development, but it becomes one of those furies inside that possesses you from time to time and makes you do things that you later regret. And so rather than having people get into a struggle of the will, I try to instead encourage them to use strategies to get the best out of their desire energies rather than to push it away. So it's very handy to have some kind of a process where you tune out the external world, tune into that inner world, and get those energies back in balance. Very helpful to do that. So some people, they go on the wagon, off the wagon, on the wagon, off the wagon. Cowboys quit drinking, he gets a job, he gets a little farmette, a girlfriend, then he goes to town to get some grain and sees his buddies at the bar, she's at the church gossiping or whatever, and he's, I'll just hold a drink. I want to see my friends. Yeah, let them know how good I'm doing. I won't even drink it. I'll just leave it on the table. And then about 4 hours later, he's saying things like, I just want to come, I'm the man. And so what's happened? The blocked desire, the desire to have friends, intrudes and takes over at a weak moment. Whereas if he figures out, I want to have friends, and he figures out how to have friends that are helpful to be around, then he doesn't have to be drunk to be around these people and be around drunk people. These desires, they're like family members. They live inside us, and you can't divorce them, and they get bored, and they want to go do something. And then they get attached to stuff, and they create all this yearning and longing, and then they have little hissy fits in our head. What we can do is we can detach the ideal from the desire. We can stay in touch with that desire energy and let go of that pain and sense of deprivation. So then I teach them, okay, how do we get there? Cognitive methods, that's those worksheets. Psychodynamic and spiritual, that's you finding balance in yourself. Behavioral and social skills we'll talk about next time. And then we review. This is the life cycle of the trains of thought. This is acting out of habit or reacting. This is what takes place in the brainstem. And then sensations that become more intense lead to desires and ideas. And we just think about things, and that those thoughts will fade if the sensation goes away or if we get a new ideal. And if we start finding ourselves getting internal tension and ready for something, well, then we have that emotion and we can process the beliefs and assumptions and the ideals and feel differently if we don't like the way we feel. And there's the story we told about Amoeba Man on the mountain, then the importance of balance, then the whole thing put together. And it's rather remarkable how often they will buy into the cognitive therapy process when they see that there's a mechanism by which this works.
Sure.